Good morning to my beloved community, and I do love you all. I take every opportunity to brag about my people at St. John's. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Phyliss Flanagan-Cox, and I am so pleased to be with you this morning, albeit virtually. I am I've been a member of St. John's for almost 7 years, but it feels like yesterday that I walked into the front doors for the first time back in January of 2013. And I would have never imagined the kind of community, connections, opportunities, and encouragement I would find here. I am currently in my final year of graduate school. I'm enrolled in the macro social work program at Boston University. There are a high proportion of social workers in the UU faith, go figure. is a great program and I'm very pleased with it. But in all honesty, life has been my real school. Can I get an amen? So taking opportunities outside of the classroom to learn, to hear other perspectives and process my own experiences within my body continue to be very valuable and powerful for me. I am quite passionate about all the various intersections of social justice. The orientation to social justice was one of the characteristics that drew me to the UU faith, and St. John's in particular. And I was honored to be on the drafting committee for the racial justice resolution that our congregation passed back in June of 2016. And also to witness my congregation working to fulfill that commitment. I firmly believe that we are all in this together, that all forms of oppression are harmful to both the oppressed and the perpetuators. This lay sermon that I am providing this morning was adapted from a talk I provided earlier this year at the Museum Center during their Women's Day weekend event. And it is entitled Examining Our Beliefs and Perspectives. So have you thought about where your beliefs come from so that we are all on the same page? Beliefs are the things that we accept as true or real. What we believe to be good and acceptable versus bad or unacceptable is aligned with our beliefs and more specifically our values. Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel laureate and renowned sociologist, stated, "For some of our most important beliefs, we have no evidence at all except that people we love and trust hold these beliefs. Considering how little we know, the confidence we have in our beliefs is preposterous, and it is also essential. As children, we have a strong predisposition to believe what our parents and other adults in our lives tell us. At one point, you would have believed almost anything your parents told you, no matter how crazy. As adults, we are inclined to believe those we view as in positions of authority. We used to have 9 planets in our solar system. You remember this? But now we only have 8. So did Pluto just drift away? No, our astrophysical authorities reached a consensus that Pluto was never really a true planet to begin with, and then they updated the rest of us. So poor Pluto was officially kicked out of the planet club. As children, we are not only astute to the beliefs and the beliefs that our parents and our community express overtly, but also the interactions and conditions that we observe. Imani Perry is the Hughes Rogers Professor of African American Studies at Princeton University. I'm going to share a quote of hers that demonstrates one aspect of our belief formation. All of our children see race. They see the differences in the way we are depicted and treated. They see the gaps in our socioeconomic conditions that are highly influenced by race. When we don't talk to them about race and inequality, the only way they have to make sense of it all is to assume that there is a greater human value for those who, by accident of birth, are white. Our beliefs can be explicit or conscious, meaning that we are fully aware of these beliefs and how they guide our interactions and our thoughts and actions. And then, and when we're making slow and deliberate decisions, our explicit beliefs are more likely to influence our decisions. On the other hand, a vast majority of our beliefs are implicit or unconscious, meaning we are unaware of their presence. And even if we are aware, we are definitely not aware of the extent to which they affect our thoughts and actions. I've been facilitating implicit bias workshops at my workplace for a few years now and have more recently begun to coordinate the program. As I facilitate this kind of work, I am consistently amazed as I learn more and more about how our subconscious works and how much it's running the show, so to speak. As I discover ways to effectively guide others in their internal work, I am concurrently unpacking some of my own biases and habits. So, who of us has ever driven all the way home, all the while being kind of preoccupied in your own thoughts, and you finally arrive home just to remember that you were actually supposed to be heading to the pharmacy? So, our brains are nothing short of a miracle. Our brains are able to do so much, like regulate our body temperature, regulate our breathing, and even drive a car without us even being aware of it. So, needless to say, there's always a lot going on in the background, regardless of if we are focused on that or not. Even when confronted with evidence that conflicts with or contradicts our belief systems, it's a lot easier for us to explain away those contradictions than to invest the mental and emotional energy it takes to deconstruct and reconstruct those belief systems, some of which we've been operating on for our entire lives. Some extreme examples of this are those that deny the Holocaust happened, or rather believe that African people came to the US as indentured servants 400 years ago, or that the horrific event at Sandy Hook was a hoax. Like I said, these are extreme examples, but the research shows that we all do this to some degree. So, what makes our perspectives so drastically different from one another? I wonder how many of you are familiar with the term standpoint epistemology. I'll explain. Epistemology is the study of knowledge and its origins. Standpoint acknowledges that the body that we were born into, our family, the time that we exist, the community that we're brought up into shapes how we experience the world and really our entire perspective. Some of us may hold the belief that knowledge or truth is absolute regardless of who you are, where you are, what your experiences have been. But more and more folks are coming to the realization that this is not the case. Hashtag speak your truth. People are coming to terms with the fact that truth and knowledge is just as diverse as our community. Nonetheless, some perspectives or standpoints have historically been more highly regarded in our community than others. This leads to my next question. Why is this so important to consider? So let's work backwards for a bit. Our actions and interactions are influenced by our thoughts, beliefs, and values. Those core beliefs and values, both implicit and explicit, are shaped by our unique life experiences. And our experiences are going to be different based on our unique physiology and our environment, especially the environment of our childhood. Everything that exists today was built on our history and everything that came before. The institutions, the systems that we operate within now are all just slightly different versions of what has come before. These institutions and systems affect the quality of healthcare we have access to, the quality of education that we and our children will receive, our earning potential, whether or not our basic rights and humanity is recognized, and our criminal legal system, and many other determinants of our well-being. I've learned the importance of knowing our history, and I sure have a lot more to learn. And not just the history from the perspective of those who have written our textbooks, because they do tend to focus on the experiences and contributions of Europeans while minimizing, revising, or completely ignoring the perspectives and experiences of the indigenous people of all the other continents. The foundation of our country was constructed from the perspective of British men who are affectionately referred to as our founding fathers by the more patriotic among us. One of our founding fathers, having subjugated hundreds of humans to chattel slavery, and another would have been worth over $10 billion today. The history of the U.S. includes the dehumanization of people of color, women, and children, followed by laws and a dominant culture that encourages violence and enforces segregation. This is the type of country that some of our neighbors are convinced is worth conserving, even against their own interest. They speak of the time of fewer rights for fewer people with a great amount of nostalgia. Who has thought about how this history has influenced their own beliefs and their outcomes? With perhaps a few exceptions, most of us were born in this country with this history, and even those born elsewhere are still likely to have their own version of European imperialism. And this history is still very much entrenched in our institutions, systems, and cultures to a degree that is very apparent to some and not so much to others. From the standpoint of a white assigned man or others with varying degrees of privilege, the residual effects of this history may not seem apparent. It may seem normal, the way that things have always been or should be. Others may acknowledge that maybe we have a little work to do, but they don't feel like the disparities in our treatment and our opportunities is a priority. No one asked to be born into this culture or into any particular position in society. It is not our fault that from birth, our little developing brains have been consistently fed information that exalts some groups of people and denigrates others. This information may have been explicit, as in overhearing your great aunt shaming your sibling who are dating outside of their race or religion. An implicit expression would be growing up only seeing straight white assigned men in your government's top elected positions. The term marginalized people or marginalized communities is almost synonymous with people of color or communities of color, although there are various other marginalized communities out there. Marginalized means that these groups and individuals are experiencing worse outcomes in regards to wealth, education, income, health, etc., due to conditions imposed upon them. But the dominant narrative that has been completely influenced by a very homogenous group driven by a desire to obtain and maintain power and money. And this dominant narrative tells us that marginalized people oppress themselves. Of course, this is not often voiced as explicitly as that. Nonetheless, this messaging has saturated our culture and penetrates our subconscious. And this messaging is particularly effective in culturally segregated and monocultural communities. And as troubling as this may be to believe, it is human nature, it is how our brains work, to cling to those beliefs that affirm all that messaging that has seeped in during our development. So maybe you aren't buying this. Perhaps you believe you don't have any implicit biases that go against your self-proclaimed values and intentions. Or perhaps you feel like you might have a little bitty teensy bit of implicit bias, but there's no way that it affects how you live. Well, that is a start, and we all must start somewhere. Regardless of where you are in your journey towards self-awareness, there is always a way forward. So what can we do differently? Before any lasting change toward equity can occur, enough people need to realize that sexism, racism, and all the other isms and forms of oppression are happening to the degree that they are happening. And being in a position of privilege can make this really hard to see and even harder to believe. Because remember, we have a tendency to explain away our witness to experiences that contradict our beliefs, both implicit and explicit. The second thing that needs to happen to move our society toward justice and healing is for individuals to believe that this is a priority. We all grew up in a culture that is bipolar. And by bipolar, I mean expressing one extreme while doing the complete opposite. On one hand, the U.S. Constitution spells out all the rights as citizens that we have, but in reality, these rights only apply to a subset of our population. The dominant religion of our country is centered on values such as unconditional love, compassion, and peace. All the while, our institutions and systems have been designed to extract resources from the most vulnerable in order to enrich those in power. Living in this country fosters an unhealthy tolerance for cognitive dissonance. You are likely to grow up with the expectations that your words can convey one meaning and your actions convey the opposite. And this is normalized. These issues become important to us only when we are proximate to those that are most affected, and also when we do the inner work to align our explicit values with our actions. And this is tedious and sometimes painful work. Lastly, we need people not only to see the injustices and deeply care about those most affected, but to also realize that they can either be part of the problem or part of the solution. There is no neutrality. Every single person plays a part and must take some responsibility. Our culture has produced a current of oppression. We are all in this boat riding along in this current. Some of us are just riding along, not necessarily rowing with the current, but also not rowing against the current. We need everyone to be rowing against the current of oppression until we reach that proverbial promised land, which happens to be upstream, especially now. This is where anti-bias and anti-oppression work comes in. One of the commitments outlined in our racial justice resolution is taking risks as individuals and learning to accept discomfort as we engage in hard conversations using compassionate communication to achieve right relations. This type of inner work helps you to be more receptive to the experiences and perspectives of others, and to realize even more how important this work is and direct you in your own responsibilities. I suspect many of you are already on this journey, and some of you may have been on this journey since before I was alive. I want to encourage you because this is very hard work, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. I want to remind you to be gentle with yourselves as you come to some hard realizations and make your share of mistakes. And I want to thank you for picking up your oar. Let's keep on rolling, St. John's. Keep on rowing.